When my wife of 37 years took her final breath, I expected my only son to be there. Instead, he was at a birthday party, his wife's 30th, complete with champagne and laughter while I sat alone with the funeral director. 24 hours later, Marcus stood in my kitchen asking for his inheritance advance with the same casual tone he'd used to request sugar. He had no idea I'd already made a call that morning, one that would teach him the true cost of choosing celebration over family. Some lessons, I realized, can only be learned the hard way. Before we continue, please subscribe to stay updated on our latest stories and feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. The morning sun filtered through Margaret's lace curtains, the ones she'd spent 3 weekends hand-washing and pressing until they hung just right. I sat at our kitchen table, the same oak table where Marcus had done his homework for 12 years, where Margaret had taught him to tie his shoes, where we'd celebrated every birthday and Christmas morning. The house felt impossibly quiet without her humming while she made coffee. I'd built this place with my own hands 35 years ago. Every beam, every tile, every carefully chosen fixture represented overtime shifts at the construction company and weekend projects that stretched into months. The kitchen alone had cost me $8,000 when Marcus was 10, money I could have spent on the motorcycle I'd always wanted. But Margaret loved to cook, and I loved making her happy. The phone rang at exactly 9:47 a.m. I remember the time because I was staring at Margaret's clock, the ceramic rooster she'd bought at that little antique shop in Vermont during our anniversary trip. "Dad?" Marcus's voice sounded strained, almost guilty. I'm sorry about yesterday. Yesterday. The day I'd buried my wife of 37 years while my son celebrated his wife's birthday with a champagne toast 60 miles away. I'd called him that morning, my voice breaking as I told him the funeral home needed final numbers for the reception. "Marcus, please, your mother," I'd whispered into the phone. "Dad, I know this is hard, but Sarah's already planned everything. The venue's booked, people are coming from out of state. We can't just cancel." Mom would understand. Mom would understand. Margaret, who'd sewn Sarah's wedding dress by hand. Margaret, who'd babysat their dog for two weeks when they went to Europe. Margaret, who'd written Sarah birthday cards with $20 bills tucked inside, even though we were living on my pension and her Social Security. Now Marcus was standing in my kitchen, shifting from foot to foot like he used to when he'd broken something as a child. But he wasn't a child anymore. He was 34 years old, wearing a designer shirt that probably cost more than Margaret's last 3 grocery trips combined. "Listen, Dad," he began, his voice taking on that rehearsed tone I'd started recognizing over the past few years. "Sarah and I have been talking, and with Mom gone now, well, this house is pretty big for just you." I said nothing. Let him dig his hole deeper. "We were thinking maybe it's time to consider your options. Sarah found this great senior community about 20 minutes from us. Really nice place, Dad. They have activities, meal plans, medical staff on site." He paused, studying my face. "The thing is, we'd need to move pretty quickly on something like that. Before the real estate market shifts, you know? Before the real estate market shifts. This house that I'd poured my life into, that contained every memory of my marriage, every moment of Marcus's childhood. The house where Margaret had taken her last breath, where she'd asked me to promise I'd stay as long as I could manage. We could handle all the paperwork for you," Marcus continued, his confidence growing as he mistook my silence for consideration. "Get the house appraised, find a buyer, help you move, take all that stress off your shoulders." There it was, the real reason for this visit, not grief over his mother's death, not concern for his widowed father. The house, my house, the house that would be worth at least $400,000 in today's market. I looked at my son, really looked at him. When had his eyes become so calculating? When had his mother's funeral become less important than a birthday party? When had I become just an obstacle between him and what he wanted? "That's very thoughtful of you, Marcus," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm building inside my chest. He smiled then, the same smile he'd given me when he was 8 and thought he'd successfully hidden a broken lamp. "Great, Dad. I knew you'd see the sense in it. Sarah's already contacted a few places, and there's this one facility." I held up my hand. "Let me think about it, son. This is a big decision." Of course, of course. Take your time. Well, not too much time, but he laughed nervously. You understand. Oh, I understood perfectly. As Marcus left that morning, promising to call later, I sat in Margaret's chair and finally understood what I was really grieving. Not just my wife, but the son I thought I'd raised. 3 days later, Marcus returned with Sarah in tow. She carried a leather portfolio and wore the kind of smile real estate agents perfect. All teeth, no warmth. I'd been expecting this visit ever since our last conversation, but seeing them together, so prepared, so coordinated, still felt like a punch to the gut. Dad, we brought some information about Sunset Manor, Sarah announced, spreading glossy brochures across my coffee table like she was dealing cards. The activities coordinator says they have a wonderful woodworking shop. You'd love it. Woodworking shop. I'd built furniture in my garage for 40 years. I'd made Marcus's crib, his first bookshelf, the dining room set Margaret had treasured. Now, they wanted to stick me in some institutional workshop like a child playing with blocks. Marcus, I said, ignoring Sarah's presentation entirely, do you remember when you were 16 and crashed my truck? He shifted uncomfortably. Dad, what does that have to? You remember how I didn't sleep for 3 days, working double shifts to pay for the repairs? How I sold my fishing boat, the one I'd saved for 2 years to buy, so you wouldn't have to face the insurance consequences? That was different, Dad. I was a kid. Different how? I stood up, walking to the mantelpiece where Margaret's wedding ring sat in a small velvet box. Or when you needed money for college and I took out a second mortgage on this house. $43,000, Marcus. I was 51 years old, starting over with house payments, when most men my age were planning retirement. Sarah's smile faltered slightly. Marcus looked at the floor. And when you got married, I continued, my voice gaining strength, who paid for that reception? The one at the country club that cost more than I made in 6 months? Who worked overtime for an entire year so you could have the wedding Sarah dreamed of? We appreciated that, Mr. Hartwell, Sarah said, her voice taking on a patronizing tone that made my blood boil. But that's exactly why we think you need to start thinking about your future. You've spent your whole life giving everything to everyone else. Now it's time to be practical. Practical. I turned to face them both. And for the first time in years, I felt completely clear about something. You want to know what's practical, Sarah? What's practical is a son showing up to his mother's funeral instead of a birthday party. What's practical is grieving with your father instead of calculating real estate values 3 days after the burial. Marcus's face reddened. That's not fair, Dad. Sarah's birthday only comes once a year. We'd already made commitments, spent money. And your mother only dies once too. The words exploded out of me with a force that surprised us all. She died once, Marcus. Once, and you chose champagne and cake over saying goodbye to the woman who gave you life. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Sarah's portfolio lay forgotten on the coffee table, its cheerful photos of senior activities suddenly obscene in their forced happiness. You don't understand, Marcus said finally, his voice taking on the whining quality I remembered from his teenage years. Sarah had been planning this for months. Her family came from California, where we couldn't just... Your family was here, I said quietly. Your family was burying your mother and wondering where you were. Sarah stood up abruptly, gathering her papers with sharp, angry movements. Marcus, I think we should go. Your father obviously needs more time to process his grief. Process his grief, as if grief were something you could file away in a folder and schedule for convenient times. No, I said, and something in my voice made them both freeze. You came here for a reason. Let's finish this conversation. You want the house. You've been wanting it for years, haven't you? Every time you visit, I see you calculating square footage, examining the crown molding, discussing property values when you think I can't hear. Marcus opened his mouth to protest, but I held up my hand. I built this house with my own hands, son. Every nail, every board, every coat of paint. I built it for your mother, for you, for the family I thought we were. But families don't abandon each other. Families don't calculate inheritance while the body's still warm. Sarah's face had gone pale. Mr. Hartwell, we're just trying to help. Help? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to help? Here's how you can help. You can leave my house. You can stop pretending this is about my welfare. And you can stop insulting my intelligence by acting like I don't know exactly what this is about. Marcus finally found his voice. Dad, you're being unreasonable. We're your family. We care about you. Family. I repeated the word slowly, letting it hang in the air between us. Yes, Marcus. Now I understand exactly what family means to you. I walked to the front door and opened it. The afternoon air felt crisp against my face, clean and honest in a way this conversation wasn't. I think you should leave now, I said calmly. Both of you. I need to think about what family really means. As they gathered their things and headed for the door, I saw something in Marcus's eyes I'd never seen before. Not embarrassment or shame, but cold anger. The kind of anger people feel when their plans are disrupted, not when their hearts are broken. That's when I knew for certain I hadn't lost a son in this tragedy. I'd simply discovered I'd never really had one. That night, I sat in Margaret's chair until 3 in the morning, staring at the photo albums scattered across the coffee table. 40 years of family memories, and I was searching for clues I'd missed. When had Marcus's hugs become perfunctory? When had his visits started including casual questions about my plans for the future? The answer came to me around dawn. It had been gradual, so subtle I'd mistaken calculation for maturity. The son who'd once cried when I worked late had become a man who saw my grief as an opportunity. I made coffee in Margaret's favorite mug, the one with the chipped handle she'd refused to throw away, and did something I hadn't done since my Army days. I made a plan. First, I called my lawyer, Jim Morrison. We'd known each other for 23 years, ever since he'd handled the paperwork when I bought my construction business. Jim had been at Margaret's funeral, unlike my son. Edward, Jim's voice was gentle when I explained the situation. I'm sorry, but I can't say I'm surprised. I've seen this before, unfortunately. Grief makes people opportunistic. What are my options, Jim? Well, legally, the house is yours to do as you please. Have you considered what you actually want? Not what Marcus wants, but what would make you happy. What would make me happy? The question caught me off guard. For so long, my happiness had been tied to Margaret's, then to Marcus's success, then to being the father and husband I thought they needed. When was the last time I'd considered what I actually wanted? I want justice, I said finally. I want him to understand what he's thrown away. Jim was quiet for a moment. That's not exactly a legal strategy, Edward, but there might be ways to protect yourself and send a message at the same time. After hanging up with Jim, I called my brother Tom in Arizona. Tom had always been the skeptical one in the family, the one who'd questioned Marcus's motives during his expensive wedding, who'd raised an eyebrow when Marcus bought his third luxury car while still struggling with student loans. Ed, Tom said after I'd explained everything, I hate to say it, but I saw this coming years ago. Remember when Marcus asked you to co-sign that boat loan when he was 28? A $20,000 boat, Ed. Who needs that when they're supposedly broke? $20,000. I'd forgotten about that boat. Marcus had sold it 2 years later, claimed he needed the money for investments. I'd never seen a penny of that loan repayment. What would you do, Tom? I'd make him earn what he thinks he deserves, and I'd make sure he understands exactly what he lost when he chose a birthday party over his mother's funeral. By noon, I had the beginnings of a plan. It wasn't about revenge exactly. It was about education. Marcus had spent his adult life learning that Dad would always be there to fix things, to pay for things, to sacrifice for things. It was time for a different kind of lesson. I started with research. I called the senior center Marcus had mentioned, Sunset Manor. The monthly fee was $4,000. $4,000 a month to live in a shared room with institutional meals and supervised activities. I'd be broke within 2 years. And then what? Medicaid? Government assistance? The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus wanted me to spend my life savings on warehousing myself so he could inherit a house with no mortgage. Next, I called a real estate appraiser. Professional curiosity, I told him. The number he gave me made my hands shake. $460,000. Marcus wasn't just asking me to give up my home. He was asking me to hand over nearly $500,000 so he could have it sooner rather than later. That afternoon, I made the most important call of all, to Margaret's sister, Helen, in Oregon. Helen had never liked Sarah, had always been honest about Marcus's selfish streak, and had been Margaret's closest confidant. Eddie, Helen said, using the nickname only she and Margaret were allowed to use. Margaret worried about this. She never said it directly, but she used to tell me she hoped Marcus would find his heart before something happened to you both. She saw the way he looked at your house, how he talked about your finances like they were his business. Margaret had known. Somehow that made everything clearer. Helen, I said, how would you feel about having some company for a while? I might need a place to think, away from all this. You're always welcome here, Eddie. Stay as long as you need. By evening, I had the framework of my plan. Marcus thought he was playing chess with someone who didn't understand the game. He was about to learn that his old man had been watching, learning, and preparing for this moment longer than he realized. The next morning, I would make a call that would change everything. But first, I had one more conversation to have with Margaret. I went to her grave that night, carrying the ceramic rooster clock she'd loved, and told her everything I was going to do. I think she would have approved. The call I made that next morning was to Pacific Northwest Bank, where I'd done business for 32 years. I asked to speak with Amanda Rodriguez, the branch manager who'd helped me refinance the house when Marcus needed college money. Mr. Hartwell. Amanda's voice was warm but professional. I was so sorry to hear about Margaret. She was such a lovely woman. Thank you, Amanda. I'm calling about some financial arrangements I need to make. I'd like to establish a trust, and I need it done quickly and quietly. Within 2 hours, I was sitting in Amanda's office with Jim Morrison, signing papers that would change everything. The Edward Hartwell Family Trust was now the legal owner of my house, my savings, and my pension benefits. As the sole trustee, I maintained complete control during my lifetime, but the terms I dictated would take effect immediately upon any attempt to manipulate me into selling. This is bulletproof, Jim assured me as we finished the paperwork. Even if someone convinced you to sign something under duress or claimed you were mentally incompetent, the trust protections would kick in automatically. The beauty of it was in the details. If anyone, specifically Marcus, tried to force me into a care facility or pressure me to sell the house, the trust would immediately donate everything to the Veterans Administration and the local animal shelter. Margaret would have loved that touch. She'd volunteered at the animal shelter for 15 years. Marcus called that afternoon, his voice falsely cheerful. Hey, Dad. Sarah and I were talking, and we realized we came on a little strong yesterday. Why don't we take you out to dinner tonight? That new steakhouse you like. That's thoughtful, Marcus, but I'm not really up for going out. Oh, well, maybe we could bring something over? We could look at those brochures together. No pressure. No pressure, right? Actually, son, I've been doing some thinking about what you said, about being practical. The change in his voice was immediate, like a hunter who just spotted prey. Really? That's great, Dad. I knew you'd come around. I've decided you're right. I am getting older, and this house is too much for me. I let that sink in for a moment. So I've made some arrangements. His voice was eager now, almost breathless. I'm going to visit your Aunt Helen in Oregon for a while. She's getting older too and could use the company. I'm flying out next week. Silence. Then, for how long? I'm not sure. Maybe permanently. Oregon's nice this time of year, and Helen has that lovely little guest house on her property. More silence. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head. What about the house, Dad? There it was. Not, what about your health, or what about your happiness? Just the house. Oh, I've taken care of that. I won't bore you with the legal details, but everything's arranged. You don't need to worry about it. Arranged how? His voice had gone sharp, suspicious. Trust me, Marcus. It's all handled. Very practical, just like you suggested. That evening, Sarah called. Not Marcus. Sarah. That told me everything I needed to know about who was really driving this train. Mr. Hartwell, Marcus told me about your Oregon plans. That sounds lovely, but don't you think you should discuss major life decisions with your family first? Family. She kept using that word like a weapon. Sarah, I appreciate your concern, but I'm 71 years old. I think I can decide where to live without a committee meeting. Of course. It's just that there are practical considerations. The house, your finances, your healthcare needs, these things affect all of us. All of us. As if she'd earned the right to be included in my life decisions by marrying my son and then encouraging him to skip his mother's funeral. Everything's taken care of, Sarah, very thoroughly. But what does taken care of mean exactly? Marcus and I are just concerned that you might make hasty decisions while you're grieving. I almost admired her directness. Almost. It means, Sarah, that I've made the practical choice you both suggested. I'm simplifying my life, reducing my responsibilities, and making sure everything is handled properly. Could we maybe see the paperwork, just to make sure everything's in order? The paperwork. They wanted to see the paperwork. I don't think that's necessary. My lawyer handled everything. Jim Morrison. You remember Jim, don't you? He's been the family attorney for over 20 years. Another long pause. I could almost see her exchanging looks with Marcus. When exactly are you leaving for Oregon? Next Tuesday morning. Early flight. That night, Marcus showed up at my door unannounced. No Sarah this time, just him, looking more agitated than I'd seen him since his teenage years. Dad, we need to talk. This Oregon thing, it's crazy. You can't just run away from your problems. What problems, Marcus? Your grief, your age, your isolation. Moving across the country isn't going to solve anything. I looked at my son, really looked at him. When had his jaw gotten so tight? When had his eyes become so calculating? You're right, I said finally. Running away won't solve anything, but sometimes a man needs perspective to see what's really important. And what's that supposed to mean? It means, son, that some lessons can only be learned the hard way. I should have learned that a long time ago. As he drove away that night, tires squealing slightly on the asphalt, I realized that for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than grief. I felt powerful. The game had begun, and Marcus had no idea he was already losing. Marcus didn't wait until morning. At 6:47 a.m., my phone rang with a call that would have woken Margaret if she'd still been there to wake. Dad, I've been thinking all night. This Oregon move, it's not like you. Sarah thinks maybe you should talk to someone. A counselor, maybe a doctor. Grief can affect judgment, and we're worried you're not thinking clearly. Not thinking clearly. The classic move, question the mental competence of anyone who doesn't give you what you want. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years, Marcus. Look, I talked to Sarah's cousin Derek. He's a lawyer in family law, and he says there are ways to help family members who might be making impulsive decisions during emotional trauma. Derek, Sarah's cousin. They'd already consulted a lawyer about having me declared incompetent. The speed of it was breathtaking. Less than 12 hours from learning about my Oregon plans to threatening legal action. That's interesting, Marcus. I talked to a lawyer too. Yesterday, actually. Silence on the other end of the line. Jim Morrison and I had a very productive meeting. We discussed all sorts of things: estate planning, trust arrangements, competency challenges. Jim's been practicing law for 35 years, you know. He's seen every trick families try to pull on aging parents. Dad, nobody's trying to pull anything. We're just concerned. About my welfare or about the house, Marcus? Because there's a difference, and we both know which one is keeping you awake at night. That afternoon, Derek showed up at my door, not with Marcus or Sarah, but alone. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with the kind of practiced smile that probably worked well on juries. Mr. Hartwell, I'm Derek Paulson, Sarah's cousin. I wonder if we could chat for a few minutes? Are you here as Sarah's cousin or as a lawyer, Derek? His smile flickered. Well, both, I suppose. I understand you're planning some major life changes, and Sarah asked me to make sure you understand all your options. Come in, then. But I should tell you up front, I've been expecting this visit. Derek's confidence wavered slightly as we sat in my living room. I offered him coffee in one of Margaret's china cups, the good set she'd only used for special occasions. Let him feel the weight of family history while he tried to manipulate me. Mr. Hartwell, I want to be direct with you. Sometimes when people experience grief, they make hasty decisions that seem logical in the moment, but might not be in their best long-term interests. Like my son skipping his mother's funeral for a birthday party. Derek shifted uncomfortably. I'm sure that was a difficult situation for everyone involved, but right now I'm concerned about your decision to move to Oregon and your arrangements regarding your estate. What arrangements are those, Derek? Well, that's part of what I'm trying to understand. Sarah mentioned you've made some legal changes recently, but you haven't shared the details with your family. That's concerning from a transparency standpoint. Transparency. As if I owed them a detailed accounting of my financial decisions. Derek, let me ask you something. In your professional opinion, does a 71-year-old man have the legal right to decide where he lives and how he manages his assets? Of course, assuming he's mentally competent to make those decisions. And what evidence would suggest I'm not competent? Derek was quiet for a moment, clearly realizing he'd walked into a trap. Mr. Hartwell, I'm not suggesting you're incompetent. I'm just saying that major life decisions should be made with family input, especially when they affect other people. Affect other people how? Well, if something were to happen to you in Oregon, far from your support system here. You mean far from Marcus and Sarah's ability to monitor my assets? Derek stood up abruptly. I think there's been a misunderstanding here. I'm just trying to help. No, Derek. You're trying to find legal grounds to challenge my decisions because they don't benefit your cousin and her husband. But here's what you might not know. I spent 4 years in the Army, 30 years running a successful business, and 40 years raising a family. I'm not some confused old man you can intimidate with legal threats. After Derek left, I called Jim Morrison. They're moving faster than I expected, I told him about Derek's visit. That's actually good news, Edward. It shows they're desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. The fact that they sent a lawyer instead of coming themselves proves this was never about your welfare. What's our next move? We wait, and we document everything. Every phone call, every visit, every attempt to pressure you. If they're foolish enough to pursue a competency challenge, we'll be ready. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since Margaret died. I cooked myself a proper dinner, pot roast with her secret spice blend, mashed potatoes, green beans from the garden she'd planted last spring. I set the table with her good china and lit the candles she'd always insisted on for Sunday dinners. As I ate, I thought about power. For 40 years, I'd given it away, to Margaret because I loved her, to Marcus because I thought that's what good fathers did. But power isn't something you give away. It's something people take when you're not paying attention. Marcus had been taking my power for years, so gradually I hadn't noticed. The casual questions about my finances, the suggestions about practical living arrangements, the slow transformation of family visits into appraisal sessions. But there's something Marcus had forgotten in all his calculating. I'd built my life from nothing once before. I could do it again if I had to. The phone rang at 9:30 p.m. Sarah's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. Mr. Hartwell, I understand you spoke with Derek today. Like he said you were uncooperative. I was honest, Sarah. Perhaps that's the same thing in your mind. We're trying to help you, and you're treating us like enemies. Sarah, let me ask you something. When you and Marcus discussed my options for the future, did you ever consider what I might want? Or was it all about what would be most convenient for you? The line went quiet for so long I thought she'd hung up. We'll see about this, Mr. Hartwell. Family takes care of family, whether they want help or not. After she hung up, I sat in Margaret's chair and smiled for the first time since the funeral. They thought they were escalating, but they were actually giving me exactly what I needed. Evidence of their true intentions. Every threat, every legal consultation, every attempt to declare me incompetent was another nail in the coffin of any claim they might have to my sympathy or my assets. The best part? They were doing all the work for me. The morning of my supposed flight to Oregon, I was sitting in my kitchen at 6 a.m., fully dressed but with no luggage in sight. The coffee was fresh, the newspaper was folded neatly beside my plate, and I was waiting. At exactly 6:43 a.m., I heard a car in my driveway. Marcus had brought reinforcements. Through my window, I watched him, Sarah, Derek, and two people I didn't recognize get out of a black SUV. One was a middle-aged woman with a clipboard, the other an older man in a cheap suit. They moved with the coordinated precision of people who'd done this before. I opened the door before they could knock. Good morning, Marcus. Sarah? Derek? I nodded to the strangers. And you must be the social worker and the county mental health evaluator. Right on time? the woman with the clipboard looked surprised. Mr. Hartwell, I'm Janet Morrison from Adult Protective Services. We received a call expressing concern about your welfare. I'm sure you did, Janet. Please come in, all of you. I've been expecting this visit. They filed into my living room like an invasion force, but I noticed something interesting. Marcus wouldn't meet my eyes. Sarah kept checking her phone. Derek looked less confident than he had yesterday. Only the two officials seemed comfortable, and that was probably just professional training. Mr. Hartwell, the man in the suit, began, I'm Dr. Peterson. I understand there are concerns about some recent decisions you've made. What kind of concerns, doctor? Well, according to the report we received, you've made sudden arrangements to move across the country, you've been secretive about financial changes, and you've been resistant to family input on important decisions. I nodded thoughtfully. That's all accurate. Would you like to know why? Dr. Peterson exchanged a glance with Janet Morrison. Of course. I walked to my dining room table, where I'd laid out everything that morning. Bank statements going back 5 years, loan documents, receipts, the trust papers, phone records from the past week, photographs of Margaret's funeral with obvious absences noted. Let's start with the financial secrecy, I said, picking up a folder thick with documents. This is every dollar I've given or loaned to Marcus in the past 20 years. College tuition, $43,000. Wedding expenses, $37,000. Car down payments, $15,000. Emergency loans, $22,000. Co-signed debt that I ended up paying when he defaulted, $18,000. Grand total, $135,000. Sarah's face had gone pale. Marcus was staring at the floor. Here's what I received in return. I picked up a much thinner folder. Christmas gifts averaging $40 per year, birthday calls that lasted less than 5 minutes, and visits that became increasingly focused on questions about my plans for retirement, and observations about how big my house was for just 2 people. Dr. Peterson was taking notes, but his expression had shifted from professional concern to professional interest. Now, about the sudden decision to relocate, I continued, pulling out my phone records. Marcus called me at 6:47 a.m. yesterday, suggesting I needed mental health evaluation. Sarah called at 9:30 p.m., threatening that family takes care of family whether they want help or not. Derek here visited yesterday to assess my mental competency. And Janet, according to your report, the concern call was made at 11:15 p.m. last night. I looked around the room at their faces. In other words, in the space of 17 hours, my family went from suggesting I needed counseling to having me investigated by the state. Does that timeline seem reasonable to any of you professionals? Janet Morrison cleared her throat. Mr. Hartwell, what prompted these concerns from your family? Excellent question. Let me show you. I pulled out a real estate appraisal and placed it on the coffee table. My house is worth $460,000, free and clear. Marcus and Sarah suggested I sell it and move into a care facility that costs $4,000 per month. Simple math says I'd be bankrupt in 8 to 10 years, at which point the state would take over my care costs. Dr. Peterson looked up from his notes. And where would the proceeds from the house sale go? Well, that's the interesting part. Marcus never actually said, but given that he's my only heir, I assume he was planning to manage that money for me. Sarah finally spoke up, her voice shaking with anger. That's not fair. We were trying to help you process your grief and make rational decisions. Sarah, I said quietly, let me ask you something. What was Margaret's middle name? She stared at me blankly. How about her favorite flower? The name of her childhood dog? Her mother's maiden name? Anything at all about the woman whose funeral you encouraged my son to skip? Silence. Dr. Peterson, Janet, let me show you what rational decision-making looks like. I pulled out the trust documents. I established a legal trust with my attorney, Jim Morrison, no relation to Janet here, who's handled my legal affairs for 23 years. The trust protects my assets from exploitation while ensuring I maintain complete control during my lifetime. What happens to the assets if something happens to you? Dr. Peterson asked. They're distributed to charities that were important to my wife. The Veterans Administration where I served, the animal shelter where Margaret volunteered, organizations that actually help people instead of manipulating them. Marcus finally looked up. Dad, you can't be serious. I'm your son. Yes, Marcus, you are my son. You're also the man who chose a birthday party over his mother's funeral. You're the man who saw his father's grief as a real estate opportunity. You're the man who tried to have me declared mentally incompetent when I wouldn't give you what you wanted fast enough. I turned to the officials. Dr. Peterson, Janet, I'd like you to evaluate my mental state based on evidence, not accusations. I've been a homeowner for 35 years, a business owner for 30 years, and a taxpayer my entire adult life. I've made one independent decision that my son doesn't like, and within 24 hours, I'm being investigated by the state. Dr. Peterson closed his notebook. Mr. Hartwell, based on this conversation and the documentation you've provided, I see no evidence of cognitive impairment or inability to make informed decisions. Your planning appears thorough and legally sound. Janet Morrison nodded in agreement. The concerns raised don't match what I'm observing. You seem to have made careful, well-reasoned choices about your living situation and finances. Marcus stood up abruptly. This is insane. Dad, I'm your family. I'm all you have left. No, Marcus, I said, and my voice was steady and calm. Margaret was my family. You're just someone who shares my DNA and my disappointment. Derek tried one last time. Mr. Hartwell, surely we can work something out. Family disputes don't have to end this way. Derek, this isn't a dispute. This is a revelation. For 40 years, I thought I was raising a son. What I actually did was enable a predator. As they prepared to leave, Sarah turned back one final time. You'll regret this. When you're old and alone and need help, don't come crying to us. Sarah, I said, I'm already old, and thanks to your actions, I already know exactly how alone I've been. The difference is, now I'm alone by choice, not by betrayal. After they left, Dr. Peterson lingered for a moment. Mr. Hartwell, I've been doing this for 15 years. What you experience today, adult children trying to expedite their inheritance, it's more common than you might think. You handled it remarkably well. Thank you, Doctor. I had good teachers. The Army taught me about strategy, business taught me about human nature, and my son taught me about betrayal. That evening, I called Helen in Oregon. Helen, I won't be coming after all. I've decided to stay home. What changed your mind, Eddie? I looked around my living room, at the photos of Margaret, at the furniture I'd built with my own hands, at the home that contained 40 years of real memories. I realized that running away from the problem wouldn't solve it, but facing it head-on just did. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my garden, watching Margaret's roses bloom for the first time since she planted them. It's funny how flowers know to keep growing even when the gardener is gone. Maybe there's a lesson in that. The house feels different now, not empty, but peaceful. I've learned the difference between solitude and loneliness. Solitude is choosing to be alone with your thoughts and your memories. Loneliness is being surrounded by people who don't really see you. I had been lonely for years without realizing it. Marcus has tried to contact me exactly 4 times since that morning with the officials. The first call came 2 weeks later, when he'd apparently consulted another lawyer who told him the truth about trust law, that his threats and manipulation had actually strengthened my legal position rather than weakened it. He left a voicemail saying we should talk things through like adults. I deleted it without calling back. The second attempt was a letter delivered by certified mail, written in Sarah's handwriting but signed with Marcus's name. It was full of words like misunderstanding and family healing and moving forward. What it didn't contain was a single word of genuine apology or acknowledgement of what they'd actually done. I filed it with the other documents Jim Morrison suggested I keep, just in case. The third contact came through Helen, of all people. Marcus had somehow tracked down her number and called to ask if she could talk sense into Dad. Helen, bless her heart, listened to his entire speech about family loyalty and then told him exactly what she thought of a man who'd skip his mother's funeral for cake and champagne. She said he hung up on her mid-sentence. The fourth attempt was the most telling. 3 months ago, I received a Christmas card, one of those generic ones with a photo of Marcus, Sarah, Life, and their dog in matching sweaters. Inside, Sarah had written, "Thinking of you during the holidays. Love, Marcus and Sarah." No apology, no acknowledgement, just a bland pleasantry as if nothing had happened. as if trying to steal my home and have me declared mentally incompetent was just some minor family spat that time would heal. I used it as a bookmark in the novel I was reading. It seemed appropriate, a meaningless gesture marking my place in a story that was actually worth my time. People ask me if I miss him. It's a complicated question. Do I miss the son I thought I had? Of course. Do I miss the son who actually existed? That's harder to answer because I'm not sure he ever really existed at all. Maybe what I'm grieving isn't his absence from my life, but the gradual realization of how absent he'd been all along. The truth is, I'm happier now than I've been in years. Not because I enjoy conflict or take pleasure in cutting people out of my life, but because I finally understand the difference between family and relatives. Family are the people who show up when showing up is hard. Relatives are just people who happen to share your genetic material. Margaret was family. Tom, my brother in Arizona, is family. He calls every Sunday just to check in, never asking for anything. Helen is family, even though she's technically just my sister-in-law. Jim Morrison, my lawyer, has become family over the years, handling not just my legal affairs, but checking on me after Margaret died, making sure I was eating properly, offering to drive me to appointments. Marcus, Marcus is a relative. That's all he's ever been, I think. I just loved him too much to see it clearly. I've made new routines, new traditions. Sunday dinners are no longer about hoping Marcus might call or visit. Instead, I cook Margaret's recipes and eat by candlelight, sometimes with music playing, sometimes in comfortable silence. I volunteer at the animal shelter where Margaret used to work. The dogs don't care about my age or my financial situation. They just want attention and treats and the occasional belly rub. I've started woodworking again, something I'd given up years ago when Marcus convinced me my garage workshop was taking up too much space. I'm building a bench for Margaret's grave, carved with roses like the ones in our garden. It feels good to work with my hands again, to create something that will last. The house that Marcus coveted so desperately, it's exactly where it should be, in my name, under my control, protecting me from anyone who might mistake my generosity for weakness. The money he thought he was entitled to, it's growing in carefully managed investments, earning enough to keep me comfortable while ensuring that the charities Margaret cared about will be well funded long after I'm gone. There's a particular satisfaction in knowing that every dollar Marcus thought he was going to inherit is instead going toward causes that actually help people. The Veterans Administration will build housing for homeless veterans. The animal shelter will expand their medical facilities. These organizations understand something Marcus never learned, that taking care of others is a privilege, not a burden. I keep Margaret's picture on my nightstand, and sometimes I tell her about my days. I think she'd be proud of how I handled everything. She always was stronger than people gave her credit for, and she never tolerated selfishness or manipulation. I can almost hear her voice saying what she always said when someone disappointed her. Well, now we know who they really are. The final lesson in all of this isn't about revenge or justice, though both have their place. It's about the courage to see people as they truly are, not as we hope they might be. It's about understanding that love doesn't require you to accept mistreatment, and that family isn't defined by blood but by behavior. Some bridges are worth burning. Some relationships are more toxic than beneficial. Some people earn their place in your life through their actions, and others forfeit it the same way. I'm 71 years old, and I finally understand what it means to live peacefully. Not because nothing bad ever happens, but because I've learned to protect what matters and let go of what doesn't. The roses are blooming, the house is quiet, and I am exactly where I belong.